Does a story have to have a message? Well, a story does, but a tale doesn't necessarily. What's the difference between a tale and a story? A tale is a simpler form. It's basically a statement that this happened and it ended up here. So you have a point of departure. You say, here's what the situation is. Here's what the characters are doing. We follow them step by step, which could be anything as long as it doesn't break logic or take a false step emotionally that people wouldn't do. And it ends up then, whatever the situation is, and you compare what that is compared to where it started, and you say that's the meaning. This is a good path to take, or it's not a good path to take because you ended off better or worse than when you started, even taking into account anything you might have picked up or learned along the way. But a story, on the other hand, a story is not saying this is the best a good path or a bad path, but it's saying it's the best path or the worst path you might have taken starting from here. So the idea isn't a story that you actually have a message. You're saying, of all the paths you might have taken, this is the one to take, or this is absolutely the one no matter what not to take. That's the difference between the two. Now, once we have that out of the way, then you look at various films, various books, various stage plays, and you say, do these things have to have a message or not? Does it work against them, maybe, instead of for them? Well, let's go to a recent story that I saw, which is really more of a tale. It's Benedict Cumberbatch in Wes Anderson's The Wonderful Story of Harry Sugar. Now, if you're a fan of Wes Anderson, you know that he has a particular storytelling style, and that's why you come to his movies, because you want to immerse yourself in the atmosphere of how things look, the way people act, and the style of telling the story. But whether or not it has a message, well, sometimes it sort of does, and sometimes it sort of doesn't, but that's not the point. Now, in Harry Sugar, check it out if you haven't. It's really a fascinating view. He did 4 short films, and that's the longest of them, and the others are sometimes attached to it, or you see them separately. It's on Netflix, and quite a view. In any event, in Harry Sugar, the entire presentation is all about someone's lifelong obsession going through something to try and understand how to do something. And it's just the journey that's important. Hitchcock used to do the same things in his movie. He would have some basic idea, which he called a MacGuffin. Now, I've never researched it far enough to know if he got that name from somewhere else or if he made it up himself, but he said all you need is like a stolen diamond necklace, and then you're off to the races. That's where the chase starts. And for him, it was all about the chase. Everything that happened in his stories wasn't so much about pre-planning that this is going to tie into that and tie into this and make the message that this is the best of all possible paths to take or the worst. No, his stories were usually simple tales. And in that case, you started with the MacGuffin, it kicked it off, got things running, and then you followed all the way to the end, and then you find out how it resolves. And you have a sense of satisfaction or not. And of course, this mirrors what goes on in real life. In real life, sometimes we're engaged in tales. There's something where we're just trotting along, and everything we do has to make logical sense next to the next thing we do, that it's not breaking the laws of physics unless that's part of the overall theme of what we're exploring. Or the emotional side, that it's true to the heart. In our emotions, we can't just jump from one feeling to another, not unless you have some sort of brain disease or you're seriously mentally ill. You don't go immediately from one emotion to all others. You have to go through in-between states or moods. And you do this by eventually working your way through to them. So you have the 7 stages of grief, for example. That's just a very simple example. But every day we don't immediately switch moods. And when we do find a situation that forces us into a mood that's too hard for us to embrace, it's too far a leap, a bridge too far, we can't get to the other side, then we kind of go tilt. We fall apart. We don't know what to do. We're a deer in the headlights, emotionally, because we can't figure out how we're going to get to that state, a sudden death, or suddenly finding out you won the lotto. You have this beat. And then you go through all this excitement. It takes a moment to sink in. Now, some emotions you really can't get to at all without a couple of in-betweens, but you can get to any feeling from any other. It's not like you can't get there from here. It's just that you can't get there from here directly. So, a tale, as long as it doesn't violate that, the audience, the reader, the person you're telling the story to can follow along emotionally and have their emotions feel like it's not too far from one place to another. A movie that didn't do this, Hudson Hawk. Okay, there's a movie that didn't do it with Bruce Willis. Check it out if you want. It really doesn't work at that level because it forces you as a viewer or an audience to jump from one emotional state to another that's too far to reach. And I think they did it intentionally just to screw with the audience. If you like that sort of thing, that's great, but it really didn't work. That's why people don't do it. So, simple tales, don't get pissed off. I do sometimes. I look at something like Lost, and I say, oh, they could have pulled Lost, the television series, together so well, but they didn't do it. They didn't do it at all. They just had one thing lead to another to another. It turned out to be a big tale. I wanted to know what the Dharma Initiative was all about. I wanted to know what this island was all about. And I actually came up with a scheme that could have made it all work together. There's no time to talk about that now. I know you're curious. Perhaps I'll come back and share it with you another time. But also, Twin Peaks, the series on television that went way, way back, that series also ended with dissatisfaction because you just didn't get the fulfillment of having it come together as a story. Why? Because they made you feel that it was going to be a story and it turned out to be a tale. That's the one thing you don't want to do as an author, is expand your exploration large enough at a high enough scale that it looks like it's got all the pieces there to make a complete story about this being the best of all possible paths or the worst of all possible paths. And it turns out that's just ancillary material, and really all you're talking about is this is a good path or a bad path. This is how it turned out, and there's your message right there. Certain things turned out well. They didn't turn out well. So one of the biggest mistakes people can use is to try and make their tale more impressive by giving it some of the elements of story but not doing it complete. Because you see, a tale is a statement, a story is an argument. And if you make an incomplete argument, it's far worse than just making a minimal statement. You make a statement successfully, you made a point. You make an unsuccessful argument, you've lost everything. And so, important to remember that when you're going straight through, logically and emotionally, step by step, that's a statement. If you try to say that applies to everything in all such cases, and this is the best or the worst of all of them, but you don't prove it, that's a blanket statement, and nobody's going to buy it. But if you actually build that case, you have what we call a grand argument story. And in a grand argument story, you've hit all the sides, you've hit all the corners, you made it all come together, and you've proven your point. All right. We'll get to a lot more about those details and other things. But again, what sparked all this was me seeing the Wes Anderson thing the other day. Sometimes he's got messages like in the Grand Budapest Hotel or in the French Dispatch, wonderful, wonderful movies that actually have a message. Most often, he tries to avoid messages at all costs, and sometimes one comes up and bites him in the ass because he wasn't watching carefully enough to keep a message out of his story. There is no message. He successfully did that in Asteroid City, and I was disappointed because I thought it was such a big universe that he had made that it was going to be a story. I thought it was going to be another one like those other two I mentioned, but no, it turned out just to be a really, really big tale with all the pieces you needed to make a story, but he left them sitting on there on the floor and didn't assemble them into anything. Still, beautiful filmmaker, wonderful mind, and I like watching everything he does. So, do see the wonderful story of Harry Sugar, if you can. And if you're unable to see it, take my word for it, it's great, and feel very, very badly that you weren't able to participate. No, just kidding. That's it for my thoughts from my backyard today on story structure. As you know, I am retired from business, but I still have thoughts about story structure. It's the co-creator of Dramatica and the Dramatica theory, and I figure as long as I'm still kicking, I ought to share them with you, even though I have retired, not completely, just retired from doing story-related things, unless I feel like it. Right now, instead, I'm pursuing my artistic endeavors, composing music, which I put on hold for a long time, and exploring all kinds of musicians that I didn't have time for in my earlier life when I was pursuing this knowledge of how narrative works in the real world, the universe, in our heads and in our hearts. Anyway, so from this semi-retired person, or fully retired from business, not at all retired from pursuing artistic things, and little videos like this of my interest, and it's beginning to slow down to get really boring. If you're still here, oh my God, you've got problems. All right, well, that's it. I'll talk to you some other time. I do these from time to time, so watch out so you don't see them. Yeah, little Bob Newhart humor there. Don't know who that is, so Look them up.